Hi there, my name is Daniel Morrison, and I will be exploring the use of medieval reliquaries. First, I'm going to give a brief overview of the medieval period as a whole. Then, I'm going to discuss the religious importance of relics, and finally, I'll discuss reliquaries and exactly how those relate to the relics in medieval society. So, medieval is a term that simply refers to the Middle Ages in Europe. This lasted from the 5th century to the 15th, and during this time period, there were considerable advances in architecture, religion, and order, specifically religion, which we'll discuss in depth later. Feudalism is a political and social structure based on how much land a noble has, and the chain of command in this sort of society goes from the king down to nobles, down to knights and serfs, who are the key players within the Crusades, which again we'll discuss a little bit later. Muslims took Jerusalem and killed Christians in the process. So Pope Urban II called for Christian knights and peasants to retaliate in the form of the Crusades. 4 Crusades later, Christians conquered Jerusalem, Europe gained religious enthusiasm, and Crusaders returned with bunches of loot. Medieval side notes include the Gothic architecture of the time, the Magna Carta, which was a resultant of the feudal system, the Hundred Years' War between England and France, peasant revolts, Joan of Arc, and the Great Schism. The most commonly known is the Black Plague, which is symbolized in this screenshot of Monty Python and the Holy Grail. So, what is a reliquary? The short answer would be it's a container for a relic, which we'll define a little bit more in depth as we go along. Simply put, it's a vessel that houses incredibly important religious artifacts. The basic form of these relics was a casket. So let's work backwards just a little bit. A relic is a holy religious artifact, the holiest of which are associated with Christ and the Virgin Mary, and the most common are associated with the apostles and local saints. The first thought I had when thinking of a relic was the Grail from Monty Python and the Holy Grail, which will be a common theme. The wood of the true cross is a relic that directly relates to Christ, since he was crucified on a cross. The reliquary itself is the greater cross, and within the middle of this reliquary houses the relic, which is of the cross. Here we see pieces of the Virgin's veil. As I previously mentioned, the most important relics were associated with Jesus and or the Virgin Mary. As we see here, the reliquary is a bit different than the typical casket shape, which is something we will address a little bit later. These are the chains of St. Peter, and this is the most common form of a reliquary in the casket or chassis shape. So as we see here, these are the chains of St. Peter, who was an apostle of Jesus and traveled professing the good news of Christ's resurrection. These are the chains that he was bound in when he was in prison. Relics, aside from giving cool points and street creds, were sought after by monasteries and cathedrals as proud decorative accomplishments, in that they gave honor, privilege, and esteem to the owning church. This is extremely important within every cathedral. Relics were more valuable than gold, precious stones, silver, etc., and in such, the vessel that housed them needed to be made of something of equal splendor. So they typically come in the form of caskets called chassis that are ornately ordained with gold, ivory, and gems, and the list goes on. So why would they use a reliquary? Well, basically for portability and for protection for the relic. It gave Crusaders something to fight for and something to protect within the Crusades as a physical object that had artistic expression and practical application. So relics were typically set on an altar or a focal point to keep in mind that they were a memorial of Jesus, the saints, Mary, or the apostles. So much so that they heralded the sounding of ivory horns whenever they were entered a room. This is one of the more common forms of a reliquary box. This box shows a story of John the Baptist, which is another common theme about reliquaries. They would often tell a story of whatever they housed. As we see here, it probably held a relic of John the Baptist. This is a reliquary chassis with St. Valerie. Um, Again, you see this is a bit more ornate and decorated and less crude material. But again, we see that there's a story uh, that takes place on this that would remind the Crusaders and even just regular churchgoers of what it portrayed. This is one of the less common forms of a reliquary, but again, it's still the casket form. It's housed by crude metal and glass, crystal, which is what would have been less common at the time, but very, very much an important religious feature. The items gained popularity in that Charlemagne kind of made them popular in every cathedral and church. Since the Crusades aided Christianity's rapid expansion, the holy items were seen as loot from the conquest. Essentially, they were animate symbols of victory. So the relics were taken whenever a territory was reclaimed by the Crusaders or claimed by the Crusaders, and they carried some relics with them for God's favor as a sign of something to look forward to, as if they were attaining God's grace. They were eventually surrendered indirectly to the Pope. The Middle Ages were heavily pious, and so relics were immensely holy objects at this time, in that they were a physical representation of the religion. So when you have a relic, of course you'll need something to put it in, and what better than a reliquary? Thank you.